Every week, the headlines let you know what happened, but not what it means. Behind the sound bites, there are real consequences for Canada's economy, its sovereignty, and the stability of everyday life. So let's cut through the noise and get to what actually matters. I'm Bo Kaufman, and this is the Sanity Project. Each week, we break down the biggest stories shaping Canada. Not just the headlines, but the implications behind them. What's changing, what's at risk, and what does it all mean for you, your money, and the country as a whole? To help us break it all down, here are senior anchors Rachel Bennett and Michael Reeves. Let's get into it.
Imagine you're watching this massive cargo ship just slowly changing direction in the middle of the ocean.
Right, like from the shore, it looks completely still.
Exactly. The shift is almost imperceptible. But underneath the water, the engines are just redlining. The rudders are locked at maximum rotation.
Yeah.
And that is exactly what has happened to Canada over the past 7 days. We're not looking at one big flashy treaty signing or some televised address here.
No, it's way deeper than that.
Right. We are looking at 4 massive concurrent engine burns, militarily, fiscally, technologically, and diplomatically. And the macro thread tying all of this together in our sources today, the real story here is that Canada is realizing in real time that the American relationship can no longer be taken for granted.
Well, and the sheer velocity of these moves is what makes this so significant, right?
Yeah.
I mean, mainstream headlines, they tend to treat these as completely isolated events.
Yeah, like, a defense procurement over here.
Exactly. A budget update over there. But when you synthesize our sources for today's deep dive, a very clear grand strategy emerges. Like, Canada is actively deciding to build strategic autonomy, and they're doing it across every critical domain simultaneously.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the stack of sources we have today is heavy, and our mission is to, connect these dots for you. So we're looking at a monumental $100 billion South Korean submarine bid.
Massive.
Yeah, and we're digging into a surprise federal budget update from Prime Minister Mark Carney. We're examining the genuinely tragic catalyst behind Canada's newly announced AI strategy. And finally, we're breaking down this highly unusual diplomatic invitation to Europe.
And look, the through line here is sovereignty. Whether the public sees shipyards or spreadsheets or algorithms or overseas summits, what we are really witnessing is a nation deciding it is just done waiting for America to provide a safety net.
So let's look at the sheer physical hardware first, right? The military domain. Because the Royal Canadian Navy urgently needs to replace its aging Victoria-class fleet.
Yeah, they really do.
For those who might not track naval procurement, these are the second-hand diesel-electric submarines Canada bought back in, the late 90s?
Yeah, the 90s. They're reaching the absolute end of their operational life.
Right. So now South Korea's Hanwha Ocean is bidding to build up to 12 new diesel-electric submarines for Canada. And the economic pitch they've brought to the table is just staggering. I mean, they are projecting a $94.1 billion boost to Canada's GDP by 2044.
Okay, we really have to pause on the mechanics of that number, because $94 billion doesn't just, materialize out of thin air when a country buys military hardware.
Right, usually the money just leaves.
Exactly. Usually a government hands billions in cash to a foreign defense contractor. That contractor builds the ships in their own foreign yards, and they just sail them over. The capital completely leaves the country.
But Hanwha is proposing something fundamentally different here.
They are. They're projecting $16.8 billion in tax revenue across federal, provincial, and municipal governments, plus roughly 22,500 jobs annually, and with salaries that are like 17 to 28% above the national average. But to generate those specific metrics, they basically have to build an entirely new domestic supply chain from scratch.
Which brings us to the industrial sweeteners. Because they aren't just selling submarines, they are selling infrastructure.
Right.
To prove they can hit those numbers, Hanwha signed a binding $345 million memorandum of understanding with Algoma Steel. This is specifically to support a new structural steel beam mill in Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario.
And think about the underlying logic there. If a country wants true military sovereignty, it cannot rely on imported steel to build and maintain its most sensitive maritime defense assets.
You need to be able to fix your own ships.
Exactly. If global shipping lanes lock up, or, if your primary trading partner suddenly imposes punitive tariffs.
Looking at you, America.
Right. You still need the capacity to repair your submarines. So this binding agreement ensures the raw materials and the manufacturing capability remain locked inside Canadian borders.
And they are extending that web even further. The sources detail partnerships with over 100 Canadian companies, names like Babcock Canada, CAE, MDA Space. But the piece that really jumps out is their partnership with the Automotive Parts Manufacturers Association, the APMA.
Yes, this is huge.
Hanwha wants to use Canadian auto workers and made-in-Canada parts to manufacture K9 armored artillery vehicles.
And the K9 is a highly sought-after piece of self-propelled artillery. There is massive immediate demand for it among NATO nations. Finland, Poland, Norway.
Eddie wants them right now.
They do. And Canada itself is currently in the market for 250 new armored vehicles.
Yeah.
So leveraging the existing footprint of the Canadian auto sector to build NATO-grade artillery, it's just a brilliant strategic pivot for an industry that has faced intense turbulence lately.
It sounds like an incredible proposition for the workforce, right? Like a completely new era for Canadian manufacturing. But look, here's where it gets really interesting. I am looking closely at the fine print in our sources here, and I have a major problem with it. A representative from Hanwha explicitly stated that this auto manufacturing venture is 100% contingent on them actually winning the submarine bid.
Right, it's a package deal.
It's an all-or-nothing proposition. If the Canadian government selects a different contractor for the submarines, this massive K9 artillery project with Canadian auto workers just vanishes. So I have to ask, how much weight should we really put on an industrial renaissance that comes with a massive tripwire? Are these promises just a mirage?
Well, the verdict on the entire deal rests squarely on the legal architecture of defense procurement.
How so?
So the Defense Investment Agency uses a very specific evaluation grid to score these bids. In that grid, strategic and economic partnerships count for 15% of the total score.
Okay.
However, sovereign sustainment of the fleet, which means Canada's proven ability to maintain and repair these ships without outside help, that makes up a massive 50% of the score.
Oh, wow. Half the score.
Half. Hanwha knows they have to offer ironclad commitments to win that 50%. If the final contract doesn't legally bind these domestic manufacturing promises, then the mirage fades and it's just a sales pitch. But if the legal framework holds, Canada effectively forces a foreign company to build and subsidize a sovereign defense industry.
Right. And to actually pay for a $100 billion sovereign defense industry, you need your own fiscal house in absolute order.
You do.
Which takes us directly into the second major signal of the week. Prime Minister Mark Carney's spring economic update. Because sovereignty isn't just steel, right? It is spreadsheets.
It really is. Finance Minister Francois Philippe delivered this update, and the immediate editorial takeaway from the sources, the hook everyone's talking about, is the tone.
Oh, the tone is so different.
Yeah, the consensus is that this reads much more like a 2011 Stephen Harper budget than a traditional Trudeau-era budget.
I noticed that comparison everywhere in our reading. The update completely avoids splashy, expensive new social programs. The government is heavily focused on modest affordability measures and setting a really strict 5-year horizon to chip away at the deficit.
Right.
They also carved out a highly targeted $2 billion allocation over 5 years, starting in 2026, specifically designed to get young Canadians into the skilled trades.
And that allocation directly feeds the workforce needed for the industrial initiatives we literally just discussed. You cannot build a new fleet of submarines in Ontario if you don't have a new generation of welders and machinists.
Exactly. But here's the structural shift that I find really compelling. The government actually announced an improved economic outlook.
Yeah, they did.
They reduced their projected deficits by $60.3 billion.
That's a lot of money.
It is. But they aren't taking that windfall and paying down the national debt. Instead, the Carney government is deliberately choosing to spend $54.5 billion of it over the next 5 years.
And the justification for that spending is where the autonomy strategy becomes fully visible.
Right. The finance minister explicitly cited the need to adapt to geopolitical shifts, supply chain disruptions, and what he called the fog of uncertainty.
Fog of uncertainty.
Yeah, our sources point directly to the global economic impacts from the ongoing U.S.-Iran war, and crucially, the intense unpredictability of the U.S. border under the Trump administration.
So instead of paying down the credit card, they're taking that windfall and building an economic buffer. They're essentially buying shock absorbers for the Canadian economy to brace for American instability.
Yes. Former Parliamentary Budget Officer Kevin Page highlighted this exact dynamic in his analysis. When a government gets a sudden fiscal uplift in an environment of immense downside risk, immediately allocating that money away is a defensive maneuver. They are actively trying to insulate domestic supply chains from external shocks.
I get that. But, and I want to push back here, this is where the math completely falls apart for me.
Okay, let's hear it. We just established that Canada wants military sovereignty. The Carney government has publicly committed to hitting NATO's defense spending target of 2% of GDP by 2035.
Right, which is non-negotiable for NATO.
Exactly. And that requires a massive influx of cash. Yet, when you look at the actual fiscal projections in this spring economic update, that defense spending is nowhere to be found.
It's totally absent.
The sources estimate we are looking at a missing $25 billion allocation. How do you claim you are building fiscal stability when you are keeping a $25 billion secret off the books? It's like bragging to all your friends that you're buying a massive, expensive new house, but you actively hide the mortgage paperwork from your accountant.
That's a really good way of putting it. Kevin Page used a slightly more diplomatic term. He called it a transparency gap.
A gap? That's a $25 billion gap.
Yep, huge. And the mechanism behind that gap is simple. The government isn't projecting those numbers because they currently do not have a credible path to reaching that NATO target without blowing up their deficit reduction narrative.
So what's your actual verdict on this fiscal strategy then?
Look, we're basically looking at a B- effort. It's a fundamentally flawed but directionally accurate approach. The government is making the right macro decisions to stabilize the domestic economy against global and American shocks.
Right, the shock absorbers.
Yeah, and they're funding the skilled trades necessary for industrial independence. But you cannot claim true fiscal sovereignty while running a $25 billion shell game with your military obligations. The credibility gap is immense, and it really undermines the entire strategy.
And the consequences of not having your house in order become even more terrifying when we step out of the spreadsheet and look at the technological landscape.
Oh, absolutely.
Because the push for autonomy touches the everyday citizen most directly in the digital realm.
Right, the technological domain is where the concept of borders gets incredibly complicated.
Which brings us to the most sobering source in our stack today. And we need to take a second here because we have to talk about the tragedy in Tumbler Ridge, British Columbia, and the lawsuits currently unfolding in U.S. courts. Before we even look at the government's new tech policy, we have to establish the facts that came to light this week. An American tech giant, OpenAI, flagged the Canadian shooter's account 8 full months before the attack occurred.
8 months.
8 months. Their internal algorithms recognized the danger based on predictive data and user behavior, and they said absolutely nothing to local Canadian authorities.
It is a devastating failure of information sharing born from a massive jurisdictional blind spot.
I want you to really internalize that. A foreign corporation held predictive life or death data about a direct threat to a local Canadian community, and the system allowed them to stay silent. How does that happen?
Oh.
This illustrates exactly why relying on foreign tech monopolies is not just some abstract debate about market share. It is a literal matter of domestic safety.
It is, and that horrific gap in jurisdiction is the explicit catalyst for the federal government's newly announced AI strategy. The finance minister noted they are scrambling to adapt to rapid technological breakthroughs, and the result is this brand new framework built on, quote, 6 pillars.
Right, the 6 pillars.
Yeah.
I read through the documentation on these. They talk about innovation, ethical guidelines, maintaining global leadership. It all sounds very comprehensive on paper. But as I read further, I realized there is no schedule attached to any of it.
None at all.
It's a framework completely devoid of a timeline.
And when it comes to regulating artificial intelligence, a framework without a timeline, it's essentially just a press release.
Yeah.
The technology moves far too fast for vague, multi-year consultative processes.
And the lack of federal action is really highlighted by what happened at the provincial level this week. Manitoba didn't wait for a federal timeline.
No, they didn't.
They stepped up and enacted an outright ban on chatbots for youth, just completely banned it.
And that provincial ban is the exception that proves the massive federal governance gap. When a province feels compelled to legally block foreign algorithms to protect its youth because Ottawa is still, organizing its pillars, it shows a profound lack of national technological sovereignty.
So what is the actual mechanism for fixing this? Because throwing around the term sovereign AI often just means giving grants to local startups or building data centers. How do you actually prevent another Tumbler Ridge?
Well, the verdict here is clear. True technological sovereignty requires strict, legally binding corporate disclosure thresholds.
Okay, what does that mean practically?
It means establishing laws that dictate the exact parameters under which a foreign tech company operating in Canada must report data to authorities. If an algorithm detects a credible threat within Canadian borders, the law must compel the company to hand that information over immediately.
Regardless of where they're headquartered.
Exactly. Regardless of where their corporate headquarters is located or what their internal privacy policies state, until those thresholds are enshrined in law and actively enforced, Canadian safety remains entirely at the mercy of foreign corporate policy.
It's a chilling realization. We recognize the immediate need to defend our physical territory with submarines, but our digital territory is practically wide open.
Wide open.
And protecting that digital territory, along with our physical supply chains, requires a complete reevaluation of who we partner with globally.
Which naturally brings us to the diplomatic domain.
Let's keep this final segment tight because it is moving fast. Prime Minister Carney is traveling to Yerevan, Armenia this weekend.
Yep.
But he isn't going for a standard bilateral visit. He is attending the European Political Community Summit. And the major milestone here is that Canada is the absolute first non-European country to be invited to participate in this summit by EU Council President Antonio Costa.
And to understand why this is a massive departure, we really have to look at how Canada operated previously on the global stage. During the Trudeau era, involvement in regions like the Caucasus was heavily focused on soft power.
Right.
The strategy centered on supporting fragile democracies, often utilizing special envoys to bolster civil society and counter disinformation in former Soviet states.
And those efforts were frequently linked to supporting the significant Armenian diaspora living in Canada. There's a strong domestic political component to it.
Exactly. But the Carney government has essentially dismantled that framework. They appointed a new envoy whose mandate is strictly focused on economic and security cooperation.
No more soft power.
No. The Prime Minister's office released a very blunt statement reading, quote, "In a more dangerous and divided world, Canada's government is focused on what we can control." They are framing this historic trip not as an exercise in soft power, but as a critical meeting with European leaders to reinforce collective security and transatlantic defense readiness.
See, I'm looking at the history of the European political community. This summit was launched in 2022, directly following Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine.
Right.
It's a gathering designed for EU members and regional players like Iceland and Turkey to coordinate on hard infrastructure, energy grids, and peace. So my skepticism flares up again.
Let's hear it.
Is Canada really being brought into the inner circle of European defense, or is this just a polite invitation, like a gesture of temporary solidarity that looks good on camera but carries zero structural weight?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the evidence really points toward cautious optimism and a genuine structural shift.
You think it's real?
I do. The European Council president explicitly noted that Europe and Canada are more than just like-minded. When you are the solitary non-European nation invited to a continental summit forged in the fires of a land war to defend European infrastructure, that signals a foundational change.
Oh, yeah, that's fair.
Canada is actively earning a new orbit. They are cultivating powerful, entrenched alliances entirely outside of North America.
Because the North American alliance is currently vibrating with unprecedented uncertainty.
Exactly. When you pull back and look at all four of these domains together, the grand strategy just becomes undeniable.
So, what does this all mean for you? Think about the ground we just covered today.
It's a lot.
Over the course of just 7 days, Canada demanded sovereign supply chains for its military from South Korea. It deployed a massive financial windfall to build economic shock absorbers into its federal budget against American unpredictability.
Yep.
It confronted the devastating consequences of its reliance on foreign artificial intelligence and faced the urgent need for digital borders. And it secured an unprecedented seat at the table with European powers.
And the convergence here is not a coincidence. It is the real-time execution of a grand strategy of sovereignty born from the realization that the American safety net, whether we're talking about maritime defense, economic stability, or digital infrastructure, is no longer guaranteed.
Right.
The era of assuming the status quo will hold is officially over.
Which leaves a massive question hanging in the air for you to chew on. If the Canadian government is working this frantically across the military, fiscal, technological, and diplomatic domains to build strategic autonomy in a single week, how vulnerable is your personal reliance on American platforms, American media, and American economic systems in the decade to come? If the national strategy is making a clean break toward independence, are you ready for a fully autonomous Canada? Keep questioning the headlines, keep digging into the sources, and we'll catch you next time.
So there you have it. These stories don't exist in isolation. They're pieces of a much bigger picture shaping Canada's future. And the more clearly we understand that picture, the harder it becomes to be misled by noise, spin, or half-truths. If you found value in this breakdown, follow the Sanity Project for weekly clarity on the stories that actually matter. I'm Bo Kaufman, and I'll see you in the next one.
If you want more facts and less fear, hit subscribe. Check out the next breakdown wherever you're listening or watching. Stay sane, Canada.